The sun blazed mercilessly over the cracked terrain of the Varethian wastelands. Most creatures sought shelter during these blistering midday hours, but Talvira moved with deliberate purpose through the heat haze, her towering figure cutting an imposing silhouette against the horizon. At nearly 9 feet tall, she dwarfed even the largest males of her species. Her deep indigo skin was marked with luminescent patterns that shimmered with each movement of her powerful muscles. She had been built for strength in a society that prized delicate femininity, cursed with shoulders too broad and limbs too formidable for the Varethian ideal. Structurally incongruous, the Biological Council had declared. Incompatible for reproduction, a genetic deviation. Their clinical words had sealed her fate. At 20 cycles, just as she'd entered adulthood, they'd exiled her to the wastelands, deeming her unworthy to pass on her flawed genetics. 5 cycles had passed since then, each day reinforcing the solitude of her existence. Talvira knelt beside a rare flowering succulent, carefully extracting nectar with a hollow reed. The sweet liquid would flavor her evening meal, one small pleasure in her harsh life. The ground trembled beneath her knees, an unusual sensation that made her pause. The vibrations intensified, accompanied by a distant roar unlike any creature native to Vareth. Rising to her full height, she scanned the horizon. A massive ship descended through the atmosphere, its metallic hull reflecting the brutal sunlight. The vessel was unlike anything crafted by Varethian engineers, bulkier and less elegant, but impressive in its raw functionality. Humans, the interstellar nomads her people spoke of with equal parts curiosity and disdain. For weeks, rumors had reached even the wastelands, talk of outsiders coming to terraform abandoned zones. Talvira had dismissed such stories. Why would anyone want to reclaim this harsh expanse? Yet here they were. She retreated to higher ground, finding a vantage point among jagged rock formations. The ship landed with surprising gentleness, stirring up clouds of rust-colored dust. After several minutes, a loading ramp extended and figures emerged, tiny in comparison to her, yet moving with confident purpose. Talvira counted 12 humans, each clad in adaptive environment suits. They deployed equipment with practiced efficiency, setting up perimeter markers and atmospheric sensors. Their coordinated movements spoke of training and discipline. One figure seemed to direct the others, slightly taller, with an authoritative stance. This one removed their helmet, revealing close-cropped dark hair and features weathered by years under foreign suns. Even from a distance, Talvira could see the distinctive scar that ran from temple to jaw. Curious despite herself, she crept closer, utilizing the camouflage techniques she'd perfected during her years alone. The humans spoke in their strange, rapid language, occasionally laughing, a sound that stirred something forgotten in Talvira's chest. How long had it been since she'd heard laughter? "Commander Blackwood," one called to the scarred leader, "initial readings show the soil composition is workable, better than projected actually." "Good," the leader, Blackwood, responded in a deep voice that carried across the distance. "We've got 2 months to make this sector viable. Let's not waste the head start." 2 months, Talvira processed this information. These humans would be neighbors for some time then. As darkness fell, the humans established a base camp illuminated by artificial lights that pushed back the profound darkness of the wasteland night. Their voices and movements continued well after Talvira would normally retreat to her shelter, a modified cave system a half-mile distant. That night, sleep eluded her. The knowledge of others nearby, sentient beings who hadn't rejected her, created a restlessness she couldn't quell. From her sleeping platform, she stared at the ceiling of her cave, wondering what these changes might bring. For 5 cycles, she had survived by avoiding contact with her own kind. The wastelands had become her domain, and solitude her constant companion. Now strangers from beyond the stars threatened that careful isolation. Yet deep within, a part of her that she'd long suppressed whispered of possibility. Perhaps these humans, who knew nothing of the Varethian Biological Council or its rigid classifications, might see her differently than her own people had. Or perhaps they would fear her, as all others had. Morning would reveal which path awaited her. 3 weeks after the humans' arrival, the wastelands experienced their seasonal electromagnetic storms. The sky churned with violet and amber clouds while electrical discharges split the air, powerful enough to disrupt even the most advanced technology. Lieutenant Commander Elias Blackwood had been mapping mineral deposits 2 miles from base camp when the storm hit with unexpected ferocity. His communication system failed immediately, rendering him isolated from his team. As he hurried toward the relative safety of a nearby rock formation, the ground beneath his feet trembled. "Earthquake during a lightning storm? Perfect," he muttered, increasing his pace. But this was no ordinary tremor. The vibrations came in rhythmic pulses that shook loose stones from cliffsides. Too late, Elias recognized the telltale sign of a burrowing Krazak, one of the largest predators in the Varethian wastelands. The creature erupted from the ground 30 feet ahead, its armored body segmented like a massive centipede. Standing nearly 15 feet tall on its hind segments, it swiveled multiple eye stalks toward him, mandibles clicking with hunger. Elias drew his pulse rifle, knowing it would barely penetrate the creature's natural armor. "Should have brought the heavy ordnance," he growled, firing a warning shot that only seemed to agitate the beast. The Krazak lunged forward with shocking speed. Elias dove sideways, but not quickly enough. One of its pincers caught his leg, dragging him across the rocky ground. Pain seared through his thigh as the creature's grip tightened. A deafening roar, not from the Krazak, echoed across the wasteland. Something massive moved at the periphery of Elias' vision, too fast to track properly. Suddenly, the pressure on his leg disappeared. The Krazak shrieked, its attention diverted by a new threat. Elias rolled away, his vision blurring from pain and adrenaline, but not before seeing something impossible. A female humanoid, towering and powerful, had seized the predator by its armored segments. Her indigo skin gleamed with sweat as she wrestled the creature with astonishing strength. The Krazak thrashed wildly, but her grip remained unbroken. "Move away," she shouted in accented standard English. "It will strike again." Despite his injury, Elias scrambled backward, watching in awe as the giant woman slammed the Krazak against the ground with enough force to crack its exoskeleton. The creature writhed, disoriented by the unexpected resistance. Taking advantage of its momentary weakness, the woman grabbed a jagged boulder, one that would have required 2 of Elias' strongest crew members to lift, and brought it down on the Krazak's neural cluster. The creature shuddered once, then fell still. In the sudden silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder, Elias stared at his savior. She approached cautiously, her luminescent markings pulsing with exertion. "You're bleeding," she observed, kneeling beside him. Up close, she was even more striking, her features strong yet refined, her eyes a startling amber with vertical pupils. "Thanks for the rescue," Elias managed, fighting to remain conscious. "I'm Elias Blackwood, Terra Corps." "Talvira," she replied simply. She examined his wound with surprisingly gentle fingers. "The Krazak's pincers secrete a mild toxin. It will not kill you, but you need treatment." Before he could respond, she lifted him as though he weighed nothing, cradling him against her chest with surprising care. "My team," he began, "cannot reach you in this storm," she finished. "And you will not survive untreated until it passes. I have medicines at my dwelling." Talvira moved swiftly through terrain that would have been challenging even for an uninjured explorer, her stride confident and sure. Elias found himself studying her face, the determined set of her jaw, the subtle expressions that crossed her features as she navigated the landscape. "You're Varethian," he said, piecing together information from his pre-mission briefings. "But I thought Varethians avoided the wastelands." A flicker of emotion, pain perhaps, crossed her face. "Most do." They reached a cleverly disguised cave entrance as the storm intensified. Inside, the space opened into a surprisingly comfortable dwelling. Handcrafted furnishings filled the main chamber, along with collections of fossils, crystals, and botanical specimens, evidence of a curious and intelligent mind. Talvira set him down on a sleeping platform and retrieved various containers of powders and liquids. "This will neutralize the toxin," she explained, mixing a paste. "It will burn, but that means it works." As she applied the medicine to his wound, Elias studied her with growing fascination. Everything he'd been told about Varethians suggested they were a communal species that valued conformity. Yet here was one living alone in the wilderness, powerful beyond any description he'd heard. "Why did you help me?" he asked as she bandaged his leg. Talvira paused, her amber eyes meeting his. "Why would I not? All life deserves a chance to continue." Simple words, but delivered with a conviction that suggested a deeper philosophy, one born from experience rather than doctrine. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cave, something unexpected had begun. A connection across the stars, forged in the crucible of survival. For 3 days, the electromagnetic storm trapped Elias in Talvira's cave dwelling. His leg wound healed remarkably fast under her care, but communication with his team remained impossible until the atmospheric disturbances settled. By the second day, initial awkwardness had given way to genuine curiosity on both sides. Talvira proved to be knowledgeable about Varethian history and biology, though she spoke of her own people with careful detachment. Your society values physical proportionality, Elias observed as they shared a meal of roasted tubers and synthesized protein from his rations. But surely strength like yours would be valuable. Talvira's luminescent markings dimmed slightly, a reaction he now recognized as discomfort. Varethian females are meant to be smaller than males. My size and strength violate our biological architecture. She paused, hands resting on her knees. The Biological Council declared me reproductively incompatible, an aberration. Because you're tall, Elias asked incredulously. Because I am structurally wrong, she corrected. My pelvic formation, muscular density, skeletal framework, all deemed unsuitable for bearing offspring. They believe I would crush any embryo my body tried to support. A bitter smile crossed her face. When exile was announced, many seemed relieved. They feared me. Elias shook his head. On Earth, we learned long ago that biological diversity strengthens a species. What your council calls aberration, we might call evolution. Something in his words seemed to touch her deeply. For a moment, her composed facade cracked, revealing a loneliness so profound it made his chest ache. Tell me about Earth, she said, changing the subject. Your people travel between stars yet look so fragile. Elias laughed. We are fragile compared to you, but we're adaptable. Earth taught us that lesson the hard way. Through the long evening, they exchanged stories. Elias described Earth's tumultuous climate recovery, the development of the Terra Core, and humanity's first tentative steps to neighboring star systems. Talvira shared knowledge of Varethian ecology and the complex social hierarchies that governed her species. On the third day, as Elias tested his healing leg by walking the perimeter of her dwelling, he found Talvira sitting cross-legged at the cave entrance, bathed in the amber light of sunrise. I've been thinking about what you said, she admitted as he joined her. About diversity and evolution. Among my people, deviation is feared, but perhaps that is our weakness, not our strength. Elias watched her profile, struck by how the morning light caught the subtle iridescence of her skin. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see things differently. Her amber eyes met his, holding his gaze with unexpected intensity. You do not fear me. It wasn't a question, but Elias answered anyway. No, I find you. He searched for the right word. Fascinating, impressive, neither seemed adequate. Beautiful, he finished honestly. Talvira's markings pulsed with a rapid, bright pattern he hadn't seen before. She reached out, hesitantly, her large hand hovering near his face. May I? He nodded, and her fingers brushed his cheek with exquisite gentleness, tracing the line of his scar. We are so different, she whispered. Yes, he agreed, and no. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then the silence was broken by the crackle of his communication device reactivating as the storm finally dissipated. Commander Blackwood, do you copy? Lieutenant Reeves's voice sounded tinny through the damaged speaker. Reality crashed back. Elias answered quickly, assuring his team he was alive and providing coordinates for extraction. They will come soon, Talvira said, withdrawing her hand. You will return to your people. Come with me, Elias suggested impulsively. Meet my team. We could use someone with your knowledge of the terrain and local biology. She hesitated, fear and longing warring on her face. Your people may react as mine did. Give them a chance to surprise you, he countered, standing and offering his hand to her. A gesture that seemed almost comical given their size difference, yet weighted with significance. Talvira looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, with a decisiveness that transformed her features, she took it in her own. When the Terra Core extraction team arrived an hour later, they found their commander standing shoulder to hip beside a towering Varethian woman. Their shock was evident. but Elia's matter-of-fact introduction set the tone. "This is Talvira, expert on Varethian ecology and the reason I'm still breathing. She's joining us as a consultant." Later that night, as Talvira tentatively navigated the human camp, ducking to enter their structures, carefully handling their seemingly fragile equipment, Elias watched her with growing admiration. Every challenge she approached with intelligence and grace, every curious glance from his crew she met with dignified patience. The barriers between them, physical, biological, cultural, suddenly seemed far less insurmountable than either of their societies might have claimed. 2 months became 3, then 4. The terraforming project progressed ahead of schedule, aided significantly by Talvira's extensive knowledge. What began as a professional relationship between her and the Terra Core team evolved into genuine camaraderie. Even the most skeptical crew members had come to respect her intelligence and strength. But it was with Elias that she formed the deepest connection. Their evenings often ended in long conversations that stretched into the night, discussions that ranged from philosophical debates to personal confessions. He taught her Earth games like chess. She showed him how to read Varethian star patterns. Each day brought them closer, the attraction between them growing despite, or perhaps because of, their differences. On a rare day off, they hiked to a ridge overlooking a newly irrigated valley. Pink-tinged grasses, Earth species modified for Varethian soil, rippled in the breeze like an alien ocean. "Your people have transformed the wastelands in mere months," Talvira marveled, settling beside Elias on a sun-warmed rock. "What took my ancestors centuries?" "We had help," he reminded her, his shoulder brushing against her arm. The casual contact sent a familiar warmth through her core. "This is as much your achievement as ours." She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her markings pulse involuntarily. Over the weeks, she'd learned to read his expressions, the slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes when amused, the subtle tensing of his jaw when concerned. Now she saw something different, desire tempered with uncertainty. "Elias," she said softly, "there is something Varethians do when they wish to share deeper emotions." Slowly, she extended her palm toward his face. "Our markings can synchronize vibrations with another's bioelectrical field. It creates a connection." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Without hesitation, he leaned into her touch. The moment her palm met his cheek, her markings illuminated with heightened brilliance. A gasp escaped her as sensations flowed between them, his wonder, his admiration, his desire all washing over her in waves. "I feel you," he whispered in astonishment, "like an echo." "This is normally only possible between Varethians," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I did not know if it would work." He covered her hand with his own, smaller but strong and sure. "What does it mean that it does?" "It means," she replied, "that perhaps the biological council was wrong about more than just my physical structure." What began as a bioenergetic connection transformed into something more primal as his lips found hers. Different anatomies meant unfamiliar sensations, but they discovered each other with patient exploration, her immense strength held in careful check against his more compact resilience. They returned to her cave dwelling as twilight painted the sky in deepening purples. Inside, illuminated only by the gentle glow of her markings, they crossed the final boundary between their species. Elias' hands mapped territories no Varethian male had dared approach, finding pleasure points that drew sounds from her throat she never knew she could make. Her larger frame curled protectively around him even as he claimed her with surprisingly matched intensity. What she possessed in raw power, he matched in determined passion. "You won't break me," he assured her when she hesitated, afraid of her own strength. "Trust yourself." And she did. For hours, they moved together in a dance of discovery, her markings pulsing in rhythm with their shared heartbeats, illuminating the chamber in patterns that reflected their escalating pleasure. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay entwined, her large form curled around his, Talvira experienced a wholeness she had never imagined possible. For the first time in her life, her body felt not like a mistake, but exactly as it should be. Weeks passed, their relationship deepening as the terraforming project entered its final phase. The once barren wasteland now supported growing ecosystems, hybrids of Earth and Varethian species creating something entirely new, like them. When Talvira began experiencing unusual symptoms, dizziness, sensitivity to sense, unexplained fatigue, She dismissed them as adaptations to the changing environment. It was Dr. Nalini, the expedition's physician, who first suggested a more radical possibility. "These readings are unprecedented," Dr. Nalini murmured, studying her scanner with widened eyes. "I'd like to run a more specific test." Later that day, Talvira sat motionless in the medical unit as Dr. Nalini confirmed what should have been impossible. "You're pregnant," the doctor said, wonder and scientific curiosity mingling in her voice. "Approximately 7 weeks based on these markers." "That cannot be," Talvira whispered, her markings pulsing erratically with shock. "My people determined I cannot conceive, and cross-species reproduction is supposedly impossible, yes," Dr. Nalini agreed. "Yet here we are, looking at conclusive evidence, your unique physiology and something in the compatibility between your species at a cellular level." She shook her head. "It defies everything we understand about xenobiology." When Elias arrived, summoned by an urgent message, his expression shifted from concern to disbelief to awe as Dr. Nalini explained. "A child," he repeated, moving to Talvira's side. "Our child." She nodded, still processing the revelation. "They said I was too large, too strong, that my body would reject any conception." Her hands trembled as she placed them over her abdomen. "I never dared to hope." "Hope now," he said fiercely, covering her hands with his own. "Hope for all of it." That night, as news spread throughout the camp, Talvira watched the stars from the entrance of their shared quarters. Life had taken root where nothing was meant to grow, in the transformed wasteland and within her own body. But along with joy came foreboding. Such news would not remain contained. Soon it would reach the Varethian Central Authority, and with it, questions she was not ready to answer. The Varethian delegation arrived with the changing of seasons. 3 sleek vessels descended near the terraforming base, their design a stark contrast to the utilitarian human ships. From them emerged representatives of the Biological Council, flanked by enforcement officers whose crystalline armor caught the midday light. Elias stood at the edge of the landing zone, his posture military straight despite the anxiety churning in his gut. Beside him, Talvira's expression remained carefully neutral, though her markings betrayed her tension with subdued pulses. At 4 months pregnant, the changes in her body were subtle but unmistakable to those who knew her well. A slight fullness to her abdomen, an altered rhythm to her movements, and most telling, the deepened hue of her markings, now shimmering with protective maternal energy. Chief Counselor Vexmer led the delegation, his tall but slight frame moving with the measured precision characteristic of Varethian authority. His eyes widened briefly upon seeing Talvira, but he quickly masked his reaction. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwood," he acknowledged with a formal nod before turning to Talvira. "Aberrant Talvira, you have violated the terms of your exile by engaging with off-worlders." "She has a name," Elias interjected coldly, "and she's an essential member of our team." Vexmer's gaze flicked to him. "This matter concerns Varethian biological law. We have received reports of a genetic anomaly that requires investigation." "You mean our child?" Talvira stated, her voice steady. A ripple of discomfort passed through the delegation. One of the scientists stepped forward, sensor device in hand. "We must verify these claims. If conception has indeed occurred, the embryo must be preserved for study." "Preserved," Elias repeated, tension radiating through him. "Extracted for analysis," the scientist clarified. "Such a specimen would advance our understanding of xenogenetic compatibility." "Specimen," Talvira's markings flared with sudden, fierce light. "This is our child, not a laboratory sample." The chief counselor raised a placating hand. "Talvira, surely you understand the scientific significance. Your condition was deemed reproductively non-viable. This outcome defies all established Varethian biological principles." "Perhaps your principles were flawed," came a new voice. Dr. Nalini had joined them, datapad in hand. "Perhaps diversity exists precisely because it offers adaptational advantages your rigid categorizations fail to recognize." Vexmer's expression hardened. "This is not a debate. The aberrant will return with us for examination. The embryo will be extracted and preserved according to protocol." "No," the word rang out with quiet certainty as Talvira placed a protective hand over her abdomen. "I will not return." The enforcement officers moved forward at a signal from Vexmer, crystal-tipped stun, batons humming with energy. What happened next would later be recounted throughout both human and Varethian territories. As the officers approached, the entire Terra Corps team moved into position, forming a protective semicircle around Talvira. Leading them was Elias, unarmed but unwavering. "You should know," he addressed Vexmer, "that Terra Corps operates under Unified Settlement Protocol. Article 7 specifically extends protection to any individual who contributes to terraforming efforts, regardless of origin." His voice remained diplomatic, but steel underlaid every word. "Talvira falls under that protection. Your human protocols hold no authority over Varethian citizens," Vexmer countered. "But interspecies treaties do," Dr. Nalini added, stepping forward with her datapad. "The Centauri Accords, which Vareth signed 3 years ago, explicitly prohibit forced medical procedures on any sentient being without consent." The counselor's eyes narrowed. "This is a matter of Varethian biological integrity." "No," Talvira stated, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Elias, her full height towering over everyone present. "This is a matter of individual autonomy and family." "Family," Vexmer repeated, genuine confusion in his tone. "A human and an aberrant." "A man and a woman," Elias corrected, taking Talvira's hand in his, "creating something new together, something your rigid categories never allowed for." A tense silence fell over the gathering. The enforcement officers glanced uncertainly at each other, their batons still humming but positions hesitant. Finally, one of the Varethian scientists, younger than the others, her markings pulsing with barely contained excitement, spoke up. "Counselor, what if we approach this differently? Not as a violation to be contained, but as a breakthrough to be understood." "Explain," Vexmer demanded. "Talvira's unique physiology has accomplished something our genetic engineering has failed to achieve: viable cross-species compatibility." The scientist's voice gained confidence. "Rather than extract the embryo, we could monitor the pregnancy through non-invasive means, with her consent. We could learn from this natural success instead of dissecting it." A murmur ran through the delegation as the logic registered. Vexmer's expression remained stern, but calculation had replaced outright rejection in his eyes. "Would you consent to observation?" he asked Talvira directly. "Scheduled examinations, data collection, all non-invasive with guarantees of your autonomy." Talvira looked to Elias, a silent communication passing between them. He nodded slightly, supporting whatever decision she made. "I would consent to that," she agreed finally, "on the condition that findings benefit all Varethians, especially those deemed aberrant. My child will not be the last outlier to challenge your definitions." The negotiations that followed lasted well into the night. Detailed protocols established, boundaries defined, diplomatic language carefully constructed. When the Varethian ships departed 3 days later, they left behind 2 science liaison officers and a mountain of monitoring equipment. But Talvira remained where she chose to be. 5 months later, beneath twin moons shining over newly flourishing plains, Talvira gave birth to a daughter. The labor was difficult but successful, attended by both Dr. Nalini and the Varethian science liaisons, whose awe was palpable as the infant emerged, smaller than a Varethian child but larger than a human baby, with skin that shifted between her father's warm tan and her mother's indigo, marked with subtle luminescent patterns that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. They named her Nova, a new star born from the collision of 2 different celestial bodies. As dawn broke over the horizon, Elias sat beside Talvira's bed, their daughter cradled in her mother's strong arms. "The Biological Council is already revising their classification system," he told her, having just received the update from the liaisons. "Your case has forced them to reconsider centuries of doctrine." Talvira smiled, her markings glowing with contentment as she gazed at their child. "Perhaps that was always my purpose, not to fit their definition, but to expand it." Elias reached out, his hand dwarfed by hers but their fingers interlocking perfectly. "You once told me your people feared your size," he reminded her. "But it wasn't your body they feared, it was your potential to change everything they thought they knew." Outside, the newly terraformed landscape stretched toward the horizon, neither fully Earth nor fully Vareth, but something unique and viable, like the family that had taken root where nothing was meant to grow. "What happens now?" Talvira asked softly. Elias smiled, squeezing her hand. Now we stand together and watch the world change around us, one impossible thing at a time.